Hello and welcome to the Doctor Who Show. I'm Dave.
And I'm Rob.
And we are bringing you another Alternate Galaxies, this time on a TV series, Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Rob, are you looking forward to this?
I am, Dave, and I sense it's one you've wanted to do for a long, long time, but there was only one problem. I'd never seen it.
Yes, Well, we'll get to that in a moment. Let's just do a couple of quick background things about the show, then we'll get into what we're doing and why and how, and have what I think will be an interesting discussion. Deep Space Nine aired in America from 1993 to 1999, 7 seasons, Rob, 176 episodes.
Yeah, the good days of television.
Yeah, absolutely. So The Emissary first broadcast on the 3rd of January 1993 to 18.8 million viewers, which is huge. It was broadcast between the Season 6 TNG episodes Chain of Command Part 2, incidentally, Chain of Command, my all-time favourite Star Trek story, and Ship in a Bottle, which is not my all-time favourite Star Trek story, but it does have Daniel Davis from The Nanny in it. Star Trek then does a crossover episode, Birthright Part 1, in February of 1993. So we're going back 30 years, Rob.
We are, and TNG is at the tail end there, Season 6. I mean, it's got one season to go at that point?
Yeah, it has. So it finishes out Season 6, then does one more season, then moves into Voyager.
Yeah.
So it's just terrifying, Rob. I've just realised The Emissary is now as far away from me as An Unearthly Child was when I watched The Emissary.
Oh.
In fact, further.
Oh, that's scary.
That is scary. So look, that's a bit of background, Rob. Why are we doing this?
Well, listeners might remember in a What Have We Been Watching on one of the monthly shows last year, I mentioned starting Deep Space Nine, and it was really driven by my wife, I've got to say, who has very fond memories of watching Next Gen when she still lived in the US. She used to watch it in the afternoons after school, but she'd never seen DS9 and was curious to see the whole thing. And I was like, oh, sure, no problem, let's do it. Without that push, I might not have actually watched it anytime soon. And that's not because of anything weird. I'd actually bought the box set of DVDs probably a year earlier. I saw them at a ridiculous price and I thought, oh, there's some physical media I think will be important to own. I'll buy it now. But I had no immediate motivation to watch them. So she encouraged me to watch it. Funnily enough, we watched it on Netflix anyway, which is really good for skipping the opening credits. And we finished it earlier this month, a day or two before it fell off Netflix. So I didn't actually have to unwrap those DVDs I bought. But I've now watched the whole thing. So it seemed a very obvious thing, given how much you like the series, to be sitting here doing one of these shows.
Yeah, and the reason I want to do it is because it is my all-time favourite Star Trek series and probably in my top 10 TV series of all time. So this is going to be an interesting Alternate Galaxies. It's going to be one of those ones where one of us, in this case me, has dived deep into this series, knows it very, very well, is a big rusted-on fan, and the other person, you, has watched it for the first time.
Yes. I have made my notes, though, to remind myself of some episode titles and some bits and pieces, so hopefully I won't sound too noobish to people. But yes, very, very true what you're saying there.
No, and that's a good point. There will be some times where, because we know that people listening to this are, I guess, primarily going to be Doctor Who fans who've come across from the Doctor Who show, but also might be fans of TNG or original Trek who have watched at some level DS9 perhaps, but aren't necessarily that deep into it. And because DS9 does have a number of occasionally quite pretentious titles, there will be a little bit of sort of the one with when we do our episode descriptions occasionally.
Good.
Now, we always open our Alternate Galaxies with a first memories and encounters. Do you have encounters or memories of this at the time or before this great journey watch, Rob?
I do, but my first memories are a bit hazy and a bit jumbled. I certainly knew DS9 was a thing at the time because I'd managed to watch a good chunk of Next Gen on its first run in Australia, so I was open to Star Trek as a concept, and I think regular listeners know I've always liked Star Trek, but I've never been in deep as a fan. Anyway, I knew about DS9, but something, and I don't know what it was, something kind of slowed my interest or slowed my ability to see it. And at some point, I was also making the connection of, hey, I like Babylon 5 and DS9 seems awfully similar. that might have been a discussion with the guy who used to run the Phantom Zone comic book store in Liverpool back in the 90s. Anyway, I digress. Somehow my feeling grew that there was only one place in my life for a space station story with, stories of the week and a bigger plot with ancient aliens and a big war. So I never bothered with DS9. Watching it now, I think there was maybe only once or twice out of 170 whatever episodes you said, when I thought, I may have seen this one. So my first memories of the series are that I never really watched it and had no real interest to watch it. And this was in spite of people I knew saying it was really quite all right, it was really worthwhile. It just never interested me to pursue it versus doing other stuff.
No, that's very reasonable, and I suspect not an uncommon view. I think, the ratings say that certainly in America, DS9 was not unpopular, but it was never quite the heights of mainstream popularity that TNG was. For myself, by the time this hit US screens in 1993, I was a proper active Star Trek fan. I was watching TNG, certainly as it was broadcast about 4 years behind the US as it was in Australia, late at night, because they quickly worked out on Channel 9, the commercial channel that broadcast Star Trek here, that there wasn't a casual audience for Star Trek, and whether they put it on in prime time at 7 o'clock or at 11 o'clock after the footy show, the audience was the same. Mm-hmm. So why would you put it on any earlier? So I was watching it often the next day on tape as it was broadcast. Then another commercial station decided they were going to do an entire broadcast of original Trek. So I saw all of original Trek in order for the first time. I'd seen a few episodes here and there. I was borrowing a lot of the Star Trek original books from the library, and when I could afford to, occasionally buying one, although my priority was to buy the Doctor Who New and Missing Adventures at this stage. So I was quite active in Star Trek at this time. Now, we didn't get the emissary until the 10th of September 1994, so we're over 18 months behind the US on first broadcast, but nevertheless, Deep Space Nine was the first Trek series that I basically encountered in a proper linear fashion, or at least as close as you can in the early 90s, when all you've got is the home VCR to prevent you from missing the occasional episode. As things did go on, what happened was the VHS releases of Star Trek were based off the US broadcast rather than the Australian broadcasts. So, if something's coming out 2 years after the broadcast in the US, it's actually often coming out before it's broadcast in Australia. So by the tail end of Deep Space Nine, I was going to the local video library and just hiring, 10 tapes in one go. And certainly season 6 and 7, I watched all from hired VHSs because they were way ahead of the TV series. But I was still seeing them in order. So it's the only Trek series, really, that I've just gone from the first episode to the last episode, basically in order, basically as it came out.
Yeah, as I recall, that's how I was watching Babylon 5 in the end. I was just buying the videotapes from Target.
Yeah, me too. In fact, I wasn't even waiting for the Australian VHS tapes of Babylon 5. I was paying $40 a pop from the Madman to get them imported from the UK. That's how desperate I was.
Wow.
So, Rob, let's give our top-level views on Deep Space Nine. Now, you've just watched it. You're fresh to this. Mm-hmm. Although we've exchanged a couple of messages where I've said, what do you think of this one? Or you've said, you've reached out and gone, oh, we just watched this one and I've got to say this. I don't really know how it's all gone down for you. So, Rob, top-level view, you've watched 176 episodes of something.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Dave, I'm really glad I watched it. I won't bury the lead. I got to the end and it wasn't like, oh, Jesus, what a waste of time that was. In fact, as we got into the 6th and 7th seasons, we started doing 2 and sometimes 3 episodes some evenings, which we hadn't done before in the earlier seasons. Earlier on, it was like, okay, we've done our nightly 45 minutes of DS9, almost like homework. Now it's time to do other things with our evening. But as it went on, some nights it was like, do you want another? And another, maybe? So we really did get into it. And I think maybe the stories picked up as well. That probably helped. And all of that said, I can't really say I felt as in love with the stories and the characters as in Babylon 5. And maybe that's because B5 is a solitary vision from a really great writer. And I did watch B5 at a younger point in my life where it was easier to fall in love with characters or maybe see myself in characters. But now I'm older and have my own personality and outlook. It's harder to do. Or maybe it's just not as good. I don't know. But yeah, look, long story short, I think this is a very worthwhile series. It has a great main arc. It has lots of very good stories. But like all 20 whatever part series, 26 part series from back in the day, each season has some filler, has some real dogs of episodes. It's not like watching a 3-part miniseries that's banger, banger, banger. But that's fine. I'm used to TV from the 90s, so I was cool with that.
That's good. I'm very glad to hear that.
What about you?
Let me start by saying I think that classic Trek or original Trek has some absolute classic episodes. It's got its balances of terror. It's got its City at the Edge of Forever. It's got its Conscience of the King. It's got, a dozen to 20 really, really good episodes. I've got to say, outside of that, there's a lot of ones that don't really land. Mm-hmm. TNG is a very good series of television. There are many, many classics in that, and I could list my first personal favourites very easily. Chain of Command, The Pegasus Conspiracy, The Drumhead. Many, many others, and it's a very, very easy watch. I think of all the Trek series, the one that is most easy to just put on an episode at night and just go, this is going to be entertaining for 45 minutes, is TNG. I fully concede that is a very strong series. It's got duds as well along the way. My problem with TNG is, though, it's just all a little bit too nice. It's all unchained technology. It's all walking around in a plush hotel with nice, lovely shag carpet, and Captain Picard makes a nice speech. I mean, there's literally an episode where they build up for 45 minutes. There's the tension, the Cardassians and the Federation looking at each other over their view screens, and Picard sort of says, you realise if we go further now, our empires will be at war. And the other guy goes, oh, yeah, we don't want that, do we? No. Okay, well, we better all go home then. Sometimes it's all just a little bit too nice, a little bit too easy. There's a reason why Best of Both Worlds is considered a bit of a highlight of TNG, because it is the one that pushes them just that little bit further, but the Borg are defamed very quickly after that as well. So it's all very nice and very safe and very Star Trek values, and that's fine. What DS9 does, though, is it expands that Trek universe. The first thing it does is by putting the cast and the crew in the one location in space, on board this space station, they ground the story, and now you can actually start to develop a whole bunch of characters in a whole bunch of situations, but also, as they do, a whole bunch of ancillary characters and auxiliary characters. You can start to actually have character arcs in a different sort of way. You start to build up the population and the politics and the religion and the society of the planet around it, and of the neighbouring empires, of the neighbouring races. You actually can sort of stop, as Babylon 5 did, as you pointed out, and start to build that all up. The other thing that Deep Space Nine does that I think is the thing that really makes me a fan of it is that it's a proper dramatic test of those Star Trek values. So those values of how you act and how you think and morality and decency and futurism and all of that suddenly are tested by actual problematic, difficult sets of circumstances. The Maquis is a challenge to the aesthetic of the Federation. We'll talk about that. The Dominion is a military, imperialist threat to the very existence of the Federation. We're not just talking about a fight with the Klingons where a few ships will be destroyed, it's not good, but life kind of goes on. We're talking about proper existential threats to the entire way of life of the Federation and of humanity particularly, and how our characters can test their moral philosophies against those challenges are, to me, my favourite part of Deep Space Nine. It challenges us, it builds up a story, and in the end, I think, and you sort of alluded to this with saying that you got even more into it as it went on. I think that's a very fair comment. I think it does pay off, but we'll talk about the ending later on. But on top of all of that lovely, serious, dramatic sort of stuff, it also has some properly wacky and fun stuff that is equally entertaining, and I think does that wacky, fun stuff, again, better than any other Star Trek.
Yeah, there's a few things to pick up on there. I think previous Star Trek is mostly ship goes somewhere, problem of the week, moral lesson, warp out, Yeah,
well, it's literally made in the age of syndication television, where an audience is meant to be able to watch any episode in any order and understand it.
Yeah. Whereas DS9 does set up a situation they can't really leave. I mean, I know they do get on spaceships like the Defiant and go off and do have adventures elsewhere, yes, but generally they can't leave. And so it does set up all these grudges that accumulate and the politics of the place because they're in the one place. And doing reading, some ancillary sort of reading, I believe that's something people didn't like at first. Like, they're like, this isn't Star Trek. You're meant to be out there exploring and having a good time. You know, they're just sitting on a space station. What the hell is this?
Yeah, there was definitely some pushback on that at the start. And, I mean, they set them up with the runabouts first and foremost, so they can at least, leave the space station now and then on short trips. I think that they make the right decision, though, to give them the Defiant at the start of Season 3. That does expand the scope of what they can do. But it's still, as you say, it still grounds it. But the point you're making, I think, is a very good one, because not just was Star Trek changing in the way that it was doing television at this stage in the 1990s, but the whole of television was changing. Babylon 5, as we've said, Rob, we're both big fans of that. We've said many times that was a bit of a real leader in just showing what long-form narrative, arc-based science fiction and television could be like, and it draws on Blake Seven as a bit of an early inspiration for that. But Babylon 5 was a leader there. But as things go on, you start to see series like Roswell, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and others start to do this much more arc-based television, and Deep Space Nine goes on that really, really hard. What did you make of that all, particularly coming as somebody who had enjoyed TNG, which is very much just, Monster of the Week or Alien of the Week or Diplomatic Emotional Crisis of the Week?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the 90s invented arcs, but I think more genre shows stopped thinking the audience was maybe too dumb or too time poor to follow them. Because, yes, I did come to DS9 decades after it aired, so on one hand, to me, arcs were a very normal thing. I mean, even in my own life to that point, I'd watch Battlestar Galactica as a kid in the early 80s. That had an arc. I'd watch anime like Astro Boy or Star Blazers. That was very much an arc. Star Blazers especially. It was, the whole point of the show was a 365-day countdown to get to another planet and get back to Earth.
That's true. Anime was doing that very early. The Mysteries of Cities of Gold and Ulysses 31 are both other examples.
Yeah. Even the soap operas my mother watched had arcs, so...
True, but they're very slow arcs, and if you can miss a few nights, you don't miss anything important.
Yeah, okay, true. So I kind of missed this as being an unusual thing for Star Trek, because I've come back to it decades later and I think, oh, okay, cool, there's the arc. So it doesn't stick out to me. It doesn't seem weird to me, even being in Star Trek. There is Story of the Week stuff, but there is arc stuff. That couldn't be any more normal. That was my experience of coming to it today, and also not as someone knee-deep in the fandom as well.
Look, that's very fair. It's interesting to look back at how they did it, and the production team was sort of pushing against the studio in some ways, and the network, because the network was still sort of quite resistant to that, and they had to almost by stealth work in these arcs. And the network also was quite involved in what directions they went in. Season 4 goes down a whole sub-arc story of the whole Klingon War, which starts with Way of the Warrior. That was entirely at the network's insistence. They wanted to get Worf on board. They wanted to do more Klingon stuff because they thought Klingon stuff rated. So basically this whole diversion down into Klingon War and all that for a season was at the network's behest.
Yeah, so you tell me something like that, I have no background to that. I just know what I saw on screen. I don't know whether the writers came up with it or the network pushed it in or anything. So that's the difference with us watching this stuff.
No, absolutely. But the thing that I think does show even now, and that makes a difference, is that you can follow on consequences of things from one story to the other. I think a really good example of that, and it's one that many other sci-fi shows are criticised for, in The Siege of AR-558, which I think is a really good episode. Billy Mooney guest stars as the DS9 officers go down and meet the grunts on board a planet that are fighting a ground battle. And one of the major characters, Nog, gets wounded and basically loses his leg. Now, in most other sci-fi, that would be a big thing in that episode, and no one would mention it again. In Deep Space Nine, the entire next episode, It's Only a Paper Moon, is all about Nog emotionally recovering from losing his leg in battle.
Should we bring the spoiler curtain down at this point, Dave? Nog's already lost his leg.
Oh, okay, we probably should then, yes.
All right, boom.
Boom. So yeah, I mean, consequences are a big thing, but the other thing is that it allows various other subplots to all get their own mini arcs and develop as well. So, for example, after season 2, the crossover universe basically gets an episode every season, and that gets its own growing plot with, what's happening with the Terrans on board Terrak Nor and how they're pushing back against the Empire and what the Intendant's up to, and then, Alternate Wolf gets brought in and all that sort of thing. So you can actually have all these mini plots that actually get to develop as well.
That's right. Speaking of the war, though, once the war starts, there's reminders it's still going on, but, and I'm talking about the Dominion War here, not the Klingon one.
Yes.
But also lots of episodes that aren't about the war. So although it is in this more serialized fashion with this arc, you could close your eyes in some stories and imagine there's no war. So it's kind of inconsistent, even to a degree there. Someone will just walk down a corridor and be like, oh gosh, the last few months I've seen some tough fights. And I'm like, well, show that. I'd like to see that. I guess it's cheaper not to show that. The war isn't always a constant in these episodes. It's not like they start the war and then every episode is a war story.
No, it was interesting. Late last year, when you were doing your great journey, I also watched not the entire series of Deep Space Nine again, but was sort of going through a number of episodes and watching a few that I hadn't seen for a long time, as well as a few favourites. And one thing that did stand out for me was just that slower pace in terms of the burn and the build-up. Because, I sort of had this memory of, we meet the Dominion and then we go and find where their home planet is, and then this happens and this happens, and it's all sort of going from there. But when you watch them in order and over a bit of time, you do realise just how slow the build-up to the actual hot war, if you like, at the end of season 5 is. I mean, it takes all of seasons 3, 4 and 5 to actually get from discovering the Dominion and the Jem'Hadar to war with the Dominion and the Jem'Hadar. And that was a much slower thing than I certainly realised. And, I mean, part of it is because you've got to do 26-odd episodes per season. And so there is a lot of just standalone type stuff you've got to do in there.
Yeah. But I'm specifically thinking of, there were episodes where Cisco was on another space station somewhere else, and it was like, oh, we've been doing lots of missions, gosh, loads of missions, but we weren't actually seeing them, and then just somehow he ended up back at DS9 eventually. But it seemed there were whole months of actions that we just never saw. Yeah,
and I suspect that's... No, I'm just sort of thinking aloud as you say that to me, and you're right. I never really noticed that watching it, but you are right, and I wonder how much of that is just a budget thing, because even though DS9 flicked the switch to CGI, following, again, B5's example, which means that you can copy and paste 14 different Galaxy-class starships rather than having to have 14 models.
Yes.
It was still very cutting-edge technology, still quite expensive technology, so I wonder if, even though it is obviously way more expensive than, Doctor Who or anything else, it still actually is suffering from those budget limitations.
Yeah, quite possibly.
The other thing I just want to say about arcs is that, like, little things that make me happy are things like most characters actually get promoted across the course of the season. There isn't this thing that happens, and happens a lot in Next Gen, where a character arrives on the Enterprise and they spend 7 years locked in the same rank, the same job, and nobody actually develops even in their career. Whereas in Deep Space Nine, most characters across the course of the show actually get promoted. Sisko goes from commander to captain, Kira goes from major to colonel, Jadzia goes from a junior lieutenant to a lieutenant, etc., etc. So I just think that little things like that, when you're a fan, they're the little things that make you even happier.
Yeah, I mean, I feel for the Brigadier, staying the Brigadier in Doctor Who from the 60s to the late 80s.
That's so true. That's so true. So, Rob, we'll move on to our general discussion, just tic-tacking on various points we want to raise. Now, I've got a big one I want to talk about. Do you want me to open, or have you got something you're burning to say first?
Look, I've got all sorts of points, but kick off with yours.
So, when I was talking about what I loved about Deep Space Nine, I spoke at quite a bit of length about that challenging of morals and that challenging of the Star Trek, what I would call lowercase L classical liberal values. Mm-hmm. And I want to explore that a little bit, because I think the way it does it is just so incredibly good and really worthy of a little bit of time. You go back to the setup of Deep Space Nine in terms of the Trek universe inside the Next Generation, which has episodes like Ensign Row and Preemptive Strike, which are episodes that set up particularly the occupation of Bajor by the Cardassians and the Bajoran resistance and how people react to that. And what's really interesting watching Ensign Row again, which is another favourite episode of mine in TNG, is that it's making a lot of allegory, but it's not making incredibly specific allegory. When they talk about the Bajorans, they could be the Jews in the Holocaust. They could be Native Americans being invaded by the Spanish. They could be Tibetans invaded by the Chinese. And you could go through, you could give many, literally dozens of examples from even recent history of displaced peoples being occupied by an aggressive imperialist force. But at no point do you sit there and have any sort of gives or go, oh, they're doing that. That is about that. It's just about oppression and liberty and freedom and occupation and resistance, and you can see the parallels to all different ones without sort of nailing colours to mast and going, hey everybody, you know that thing in the news, we're doing that today. So TNG does it very well and leads into Deep Space Nine well. And then you get to test those morals against real difficult situations. You get stuff like in The Pale Moonlight where Sisko has to make a amoral decision. He has to effectively murder 2 or more individuals to get the Romulans into the war. How do you do that if you are following Gene Roddenberry's liberal vision of Star Trek? You get moral conundrums like the episode Duet, another favourite of mine, where an ex-official at a Cardassian labour camp basically wants to plead guilty and be punished, not because he himself killed Bajorans, but because he was there and complicit and said nothing at a labour camp during the killing of Bajorans. You get episodes like The Collaborator, where it turns out that Kaio Packer, the religious leader of Bajor, gave information and betrayed a resistance cell to the Cardassians to save the lives of other civilians. You then get, an exploration of what collaboration and resistance actually means in an episode like Rocks and Shawls, where Deep Space Nine has now been occupied by the Dominion, and Kira says, well, if I go along with them, I can keep Bajor and the civilians safe, and suddenly realises she's now a collaborator. I think that those are all really, really good conundrums. The other really good example I just want to give before I finish this little spiel, another favourite of mine, at the end of Season 1, the episode In the Hands of the Prophets, which is doing science versus religion. And it's talking about, well, the humans on Deep Space Nine say that the wormhole is a constructed spatial entity occupied by a bunch of wormhole aliens. And the Bajorans say, no, that's the celestial temple occupied by the prophets, who are our deities. Although Star Trek, certainly at this period, is an incredibly secular, if not atheistic, show. Gene Roddenberry has said, by the time of Star Trek, religion is now superseded. It's not needed anymore. So Star Trek in the 90s is absolutely a secular show. But even when they're doing that science versus religion debate, they explore the different sides and even give a major character like Kira the chance to go, yeah, I get that to you they're aliens and you've got your scientific instruments, but you've got to understand, to me and my people, they are prophets, and this is a part of our spiritualism. It's a thing that's kept our culture together, and so you can't just dismiss it. And so although, obviously, the wormhole aliens are aliens, they're not gods, there is a respect given to all sides of the debate, and I think that's key of all the things that I've discussed here. There isn't a collaboration bad, resistance good. There's a scale of grey between the whole thing that I think is very sophisticated and can be done because you're building these characters up over time. You don't have to do your entire allegory in 42 minutes.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of quite diverse things you've mentioned there. I'll go back to the first one, which I think is a very clever way to write when you're not so on the nose that people can say, oh, they're doing that this week.
Yeah.
Because it is on the nose.
Yeah.
But also, if anyone out there is aspiring to be a writer, just think about it, folks. If you do it like that, you don't have to then be slavish to doing everything that comes from, oh, they're doing World War II. Oh, well, I've got to do this now. And who's going to be Russia? And, trying to piece it all together. You can just pick and mix things from different occupations, different wars, different horrible things that have happened over the years and make your own thing.
Correct.
Yes. Which is very, very good.
Yep.
And then more recently, we're talking about religion. And religion, I think, is taken very seriously, which does feel a bit of a departure for Star Trek or even a lot of sci-fi, because the Bajoran faith is quite grounded. You're right, one of our leads, Kira, is absolutely into it, but she's not painted as a crazy person.
Yeah.
Sisko's role as the emissary is treated with gravity, not as a joke, even if he's a bit bemused by it at times, especially early on. People think, you're the emissary. He's like, well, I'm sure in his head he's thinking, I'm just some guy,
Yeah.
It's rare that sci-fi allows religious belief to coexist with rationalism without sneering at it. And here it mixes very, very well, I believe.
Exactly. It's that lack of sneering, I think, that is so important and raises this to another level. Even as somebody, and I think we probably both fall very clearly on one side of that debate, Rob, it's still refreshing to see it done in a respectful and therefore intellectually more interesting way.
Absolutely. No, it was very good.
Point from you, Rob.
A random one here. Length. Many times I felt the length of the episodes was a slight issue. Sometimes because the episode would be going along nicely, and then there was like 2 minutes left, and I think, oh, hang on, how on earth are we going to wrap this up? And then something very simple or very dumb would happen, and the episode would wrap up, boom, on 45 minutes. And I'd feel a bit ripped off by the ending. Other times it was almost the opposite. I'd feel like 45 minutes had gone by and we're only 20 minutes in. So there seemed to be some inconsistency around writing to this very strict timeline at times, which I did think affected the stories for better or worse.
It is funny, isn't it, watching television in 2026, where we're very used to that streaming model now where they can say, okay, we're aiming for about 50 minutes. But if this one's done in 45, it'll be 45. If this one needs 57, it'll be 57. And you're right, seeing television now that's restricted to that, we've got 5 acts that needs to be done in 42 and a half minutes. It doesn't always work, does it?
No, and we did notice it, particularly where we were really enjoying an episode and then it would end very abruptly because it had to. Yeah.
No, that's very fair. Something that I mentioned earlier that I think is worthy of its own little point, that is the whole crossover universe. This is almost unique to Deep Space Nine. There's the one episode, Mirror Mirror, back in original Trek, that sets up the whole crossover universe, and then Enterprise does In a Mirror Darkly, where they go and visit the same crossover universe. TNG never does it, other than in an original book. I don't know that Voyager ever does it. If that's wrong, please let me know. But we have about 6 or 7 crossover episodes in Deep Space Nine, and I've got to say, when I was watching this as a teenager, when you'd see one of these as coming up, you'd go, oh goody, I know this will be a good one. What did you think of them?
I thought they were quite amusing because you'd often have, Kira done up in the most ridiculous costume. or even more recently, like in one of the final episodes, you had the lounge singer hologram from Deep Space Nine was actually in that universe as well. But as a normal person, he got shot. And I thought, oh, look at this. They can play with all these different people being so different. And that's always fun, whether it is in Star Trek, including the classic era of Star Trek, or in Doctor Who, like in Inferno. It's always fun for casts to do that sort of stuff.
It is. They have a lot of fun with Garak. They have a lot of fun with Worf. They get to kill most of the Ferengis and indeed Odo. And so, yeah, like Inferno, it gives you a chance to kill people off. It's interesting. I read an interview with Nana Vista talking about her and the way that people treated her when she was playing the Intendant versus Kira. And it was pointed out that her costume as the Intendant wasn't really any more figure-hugging than her normal Bajoran militia costume. They both, showed her curves fairly tightly, but the way that she played it meant that people were looking at her very, very differently when she was playing the Intendant. And I think that's just a really good example of very good acting.
Oh, yeah. But I think there was some black leather involved as well, Dave, which looked a little more alluring than that red waffly sort of outfit. Yeah.
No, fair enough. What else have you got to say, Rob?
Oh, I've got so many things. Okay, here's a fun one. I know your Goodies podcast, Dave, had a section called Look, It Was the 70s. So can we do Look, It Was the 90s? Because there's an underlying perviness all through the show. I think of the Darbo girls in Quarks. I mean, they're eye candy to distract the Darbo players. But there's also a pretty strong suggestion many times in the episodes that some of them might do a little sex work on the side. And the costumes are very revealing. I mean, I was looking at one and thinking, oh, she's basically naked under a transparent body stocking there. And, without some strategically placed designs covering the lack of underwear, I'm not sure what I'd be seeing, which is pretty wild for what people perceive Star Trek to be, like, a show for nerdy teenagers. And speaking of quarks, there's also the Holo Suites, where it's implied that a lot of the programs are sex programs, and numerous references are made to slave girls being in the programs. I mean, let that sink in. Slave girls. I also remember the episode where one rich guy orders up a holodeck program of Kira for him to shag, basically. These are all pretty crazy and even disturbing things when you scratch below the surface, which isn't to say it's not realistic. Think of what people do with AI pornography today. I think people would absolutely do this on a holodeck. But when I think of Star Trek, modern Star Trek here in 2026, I think of how extraordinary these 90s episodes now seem in these areas. I don't think anyone in Star Trek Academy, for example, will be zipping off to have a holodeck session with some slave girls, for example, Dave.
No, and it was certainly a big departure for the franchise at the time. I mean, you think about the holodeck in TNG, and when Reg Barclay is just summing up a fully clothed image of Deanna Troi to sort of talk sexually at him, that's a big, like, oh, that's very inappropriate. But how many fans aren't watching that going, well, hang on, so you can just conjure up any person you want to act however you want. That's going to, like, and suddenly you get to Quarks on Deep Space Nine, and it's like, yeah, we have sex programs. Like, we basically have a holo brothel. And you start to go, well, that's very, very icky, but is it immoral? And you're exploring it, but you're right. I don't think the series ever quite pushes back on that the way that I think the characters would now.
No, I mean, is it icky? If they're just imaginary people in there, I don't think it's icky at all. But if you're getting Quark to do like a full body scan of Kira so that the person you're shagging is actually Kira, that's quite a violation.
Yeah.
And they never really touch on it. I mean, how does she get him back? Doesn't she put his head on her body? So when the client goes in, it's like, oh, come here, big boy. But it's Quark's head on her body. So it's like a ha-ha ending. But it is quite a violation to have someone shagging your body without your permission.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. But it's interesting that, unlike the original two series of Star Trek, we now have a lot of members of the cast who are not members of Starfleet. And that, I think, allows them to be a lot dodgier. So you get Odo, who is not a member of Starfleet. You get Kira, and all the Bajoran work is there. But you also get characters like Quark and all of his crew, Morn, people who have not been through Starfleet Academy and been imbibed in Picard-esque Starfleet values. They are corruptible, capitalist, all the things that Gene Roddenberry doesn't like.
Yeah.
Sorry. In terms of some things, I think Gene Roddenberry was not exactly the most wholesome person either when it came to some of that stuff.
No. But I mean, talking about all this capitalist stuff, I mean, Ferengi, Dave, their comedy episodes did leave me cold a lot of the time. I know you sort of were talking about them earlier as if you might be quite fond of them. Mostly I'm thinking of the Grand Nagus episodes because they all seem to be riffs on the same storyline with the same gags. Like, oh, the Nagus is retiring. The Nagus is missing. We might need another Nagus, Mother, why are you wearing clothes? All the same jokes over and over and over and over. There were some very fun Ferengi-centric episodes, but mostly those capitalist Ferengi type episodes didn't really float my boat.
Well, it's interesting. In the same way that you'd see that, this week it's going to be the season's crossover universe episode. Oh, great. I did have those moments of, so this week we're doing this season's Ferengi episode. That's a shame.
Right.
I look, you're right. There are some better ones and some worse ones. And Armin Shimmerman is a fantastic comedic actor. And they clearly worked out that he had a lot of talent and Quark was a breakout character. So they wanted to highlight him to the best ways they could. But I do agree there are diminishing returns from the Ferengi episodes. But it's good that they did that. It's good that they developed them. But there are, outside of Ferengi ones, a lot of really fun episodes that I think are worth highlighting.
Absolutely.
I think of something like Take Me Out to the Holo Suite, which is just a fun, bonkers Star Trek style episode where the humans play the Vulcans at baseball and Sisko learns a lesson. Who Mourns for Morn, which is all about this guy that just sits at the bar for 7 seasons and never speaks. We get a whole episode around him. Little Green Men, where Quark and his family go back to 1947 Roswell and become the Roswell aliens. They're just 3 examples I've thought of where you just go, in amongst a lot of really dark stuff, I'm going to explore more of that in a moment, you just have some real properly fun, bonkers episodes.
Yeah, completely agree with that. Dave, let's change tack. A point I wanted to bring up was lovey-dovey stuff. Because as the show goes on, we get more and more romantic setups. And I think that stuff's a bit of a mistake in many shows because it adds layers that can get in the way of a particular story you might want to tell. Unless it's a story about the 2 people in question being in love. I get that. I totally get the audience would have been out there shipping, yes, even in the 90s, maybe even doing slash fiction, all of that stuff. Maybe the production team are leaning into it. Again, I don't know because I wasn't that into the fandom. I think of X-Files, though, in a similar vein, and that was 1,000% more interesting when Mulder and Scully were just colleagues with a whiff of tension, a whiff of something between them, rather than actually consummating anything, which thankfully didn't happen until about season 7, spoilers, in X-Files. But here we start doing stories early on with Kira and whoever her latest fancy man is, until it's her and Odo. And of course, Sisko and Cassidy becomes a thing later on, and Sisko had that earlier story where he was in love with the psychic projection, not forgetting Worf and Dax and Rom and Lita, Miles and Keiko. Odo had his fling with Troy's mother. On and on it goes. I generally didn't find a lot of that interesting. Some of it was very funny. Possibly the best was Dax and Worf. It felt reasonably realistic, and it does lead somewhere even after she dies. But I would have dialed back a bit on the love stuff more broadly. I guess now I sound like you when you watch Doctor Who, Dave, but that was my feeling watching Deep Space Nine.
I'm partially with you. I'm partially with you and partially against you on that one. I think that if you're going to have a group of characters and we're going to watch them across 7 years, the idea that they would be unromantic, if not asexual, for that 7 years, I think would actually bring a lack of credibility to the show. In the same way I talk about TNG characters never getting promoted across 7 years and never getting a job transfer over 7 years, kind of looks a bit weird over time. Also, TNG characters who just don't seem to ever have a proper meaningful relationship for 7 years. It looks a bit weird. So I think if you do nothing, it doesn't work. But you can also do too much. You can do it well and you can do it badly. I think that one of the highlights for me of the show are the Sisko relationships. I think that him meeting a woman, dating her, having some ups and downs, having some problems, and slowly falling in love with her and deciding to marry her. And she's not a member of his crew. She's not another Starfleet officer. She's just somebody that he's met in the course of his life with the aid of his son. I think actually is a really nice romance that works very well. And it's probably worth adding at this point as well, aided by the fact that I think Jake Sisko is a great character. He is not a sci-fi kid. He's not, Wesley Crusher or Adric or Jonathan Brandis's character on DSV. He's just a kid whose dad's been transferred here, and he gets to be treated like a kid. He messes up like a kid. He does nice things like a kid, and he grows up like a kid. He has a career path that he wants to go down. I think Jake's a really good thing that adds a lot to Sisko. I agree that Dax and Worf, although occasionally it's a bit ham-fisted, at least there's something interesting there. I think that Julian and Dax is terrible. I think that Julian, frankly, anybody is terrible. One thing you talked about, what you couldn't get away with today, Julian just sort of sexually harassing everybody in the workplace that he thinks he fancies. You probably would dial back now. Is it truth to character? Is he a cocky 23, 24-year-old bloke who's been to medical school and therefore, thinks he's big swinging dick and can hit on anyone? Probably, but, it's not counted. So look, I think that if they did none, it would have been wrong. I don't think they all work, I agree.
I kind of liked it when, to use the Julian example, he'd mentioned sort of offhandedly to Miles or whoever he was in the bar with, oh yeah, I'm seeing such and such, and he'd name a character we don't know. So his character was having a relationship, but it just wasn't part of the storyline that we were watching. Or even when he has his relationship with Lita, who at that time isn't really a big character. I mean, she never becomes a big character, but she does become more of a character later on. That relationship was pretty good too, because she wasn't one of like the command crew.
Yes.
I think of, when you're in the workplace, sometimes there'll be the expression, don't screw the crew. I guess what I'm trying to say is I kind of like acknowledging that stuff, but not making it the central focus of stories.
No, that's very, very reasonable. And of course, the advantage of not being set on a starship is that there are a majority of the people around are not Starfleet and are certainly not members of the bridge crew.
And some are just passing through, yeah.
No, that's absolutely right. I want to get a bit darker again now, Rob, and talk about the way that in a number of areas, and I'll go through these one at a time, and sort of as we continue to tic-tac our points, but in a number of areas, Deep Space Nine went to places that other Star Trek just hasn't, wouldn't, and wouldn't again, and genuinely surprised me and therefore impressed me. A really good example is the Season 5 episode Children of Time, which is the one where the Defiant gets pushed back in time about 150 years and discovers that they crashed and therefore a whole bunch of descendants have basically grown up, and if the Defiant doesn't go back in time and have that crash again, then this entire society will be wiped out, but it means that the Defiant crew will never get to see their families again. And all the way through watching that, I can remember watching that at the time. I actually saw it at a Doctor Who Katie Manning event in Sydney. They had to fill in some time and said, we've got a new episode of Deep Space Nine we're going to put on. And I remember watching that with some Doctor Who mates, and we were sort of sitting there through the whole thing going, well, it's Star Trek, so at the end of the episode, there'll be a lot of moralising, but someone will tech the tech, and we'll have two versions of the Defiant, one of whom will go back and save the society, and one of whom can go back and happily meet their family, and, everybody wins. And we go, okay, that's fine. Except it's Deep Space Nine, so something happens, and the entire society, hundreds of people, are wiped out. And it's a really big deal. And I just remember watching that going, wow, they did it. I'm genuinely impressed.
Yeah, there's another episode where I had exactly the same response of, I can't believe they just did that. But I might talk about that later when we get to favourite episodes.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
Dave, I've mentioned a few times that I wasn't in the fandom of Star Trek then. I'm not in the fandom of Star Trek now. So I come at this from an outsider, but I get the sense that DS9's way more influential than it might get credit for. I can draw a line very easily between DS9 to the reimagined Battlestar Galactica, and I didn't miss for a second that Ronald D. Moore, who was the showrunner of BSG, was involved very heavily here. I can see its influence in The Expanse, which is a very underrated show that I absolutely adored. This is all modern prestige sci-fi TV, and I think DS9 has had some sort of influence in it. At least that's my sense, working in my own little bubble. Am I wrong?
No, I think you have to be right. Because although other shows were doing similar things, Deep Space Nine was doing it on network television in prime time with millions of people watching. As much as we're big fans of Babylon 5 and indeed Buffy, Roswell and a bunch of other shows, all of those were on syndicated television, like cable television, and had ratings of, 1 million if they were lucky. Whereas Deep Space Nine has rating, its opening episode opens to 18 million people, and it's getting, 8 to 12 through most of its run. That's phenomenally important. So I think in terms of entrenching these ideas of sci-fi narrative into popular culture, it did it in a way that the others just simply couldn't.
Yeah, I agree there.
Another way that Deep Space Nine really tests those Star Trek values and morals is the introduction in Season 6 and 7 of Section 31, which we have with our Agent Sloan. That, to me, is one of the most interesting ideas ever brought into Star Trek. And it's done in this way where, at the end of the episode, having had this guy come along and say, I'm from this dark secret agent that does all the dirty work that Starfleet can't do publicly, the characters don't say, well, that could never happen, we need to shut it down. Sisko basically says, well, I hate to think that it exists, but I kind of get why it has to. And I think it's Oda that points out everybody else has a version of this, whether it's the Tal Shiar, the Obsidian Order, etc. Of course Earth would have a version of that. That just idea that somewhere under this nice federation, there's a dark ops group doing the really bad stuff, is just a really interesting idea. And they then have sort of brought that into stuff like Discovery and even Enterprise. And I think less is more with this concept.
Yeah, I think so. I think they do it very well, though. Initially, you're not even entirely sure if everything he has said about Section 31 is even true. Could he just be like a one-off guy fantasizing that he's part of this bigger thing?
Yeah.
You don't even know that. So that was done very well. And that episode where Julian sort of woke up and he was just sitting there and, they were going to send Julian on this mission that he didn't want to go on at all. It was like, this is fascinating. Of course, it tied into Julian's holodeck adventures where he liked to play a spy. Now let's do it for real, son. Yeah, I quite enjoyed those episodes a lot.
Yeah, and the final Section 31 one where Admiral Ross, who's sort of the leader of the good guys in the battle against the Dominion, at the end Julian confronts him and says, "You were in on this, weren't you? You were complicit." And Ross is like, "I didn't quite know how far it would go, but yes, I was, and I don't like how we got there, but we got to the place we needed to get."
Yeah, that's great.
I'll keep going with some interesting concepts there, Rob, with the Marquis, and particularly the defection of Commander Eddington from Starfleet to the Marquis. I enjoy in Deep Space Nine the challenging of the principles of the Federation, and this idea that if you agree with everything the Federation does and you're going along with their version of paradise, it's all very lovely, but if you disagree, if you dissent, maybe they're a little bit harsher than we realise, I think is really interesting. You see that with the Marquis, again, a concept that was set up very well in TNG. You see that with characters, but Eddington really pushes back on that concept, that idea of the biggest crime is leaving paradise. You can't stand that. And even conversations you get with people like Garak and Quark, where they're looking at the Federation as outsiders and going, they're insidious. You just, almost like the Borg, except the Borg admit that they're assimilating you. Now, I don't necessarily agree with everything that those characters say or that Eddington does, but the fact that we morally put the acid on the Federation, I think is really interesting. And certainly the episode where Eddington defects, I remember watching that for the first time just going, hang on, what? This doesn't happen. He's been a regular for a year. He doesn't turn into a bad... Wow, he's a bad guy now.
But the interesting thing was, Dave, he did sort of do them dirty once or twice in earlier stories. Like, he was kind of a shifty, dodgy guy. So when he did defect, it wasn't entirely a surprise. Like, I think my wife even said something like, why are we still trusting this guy? Like, okay. he was a real shit 15 episodes ago or whatever it might have been. So that was the only thing that detracted from it. He wasn't like the model officer. I mean, he was the model officer in the sense he's very good at his job, but he had done them wrong once or twice before he defected. I do recall that.
Yeah, well, there's that interesting episode in The Adversary where Sisko's basically breaking Starfleet rules, and anybody who objects to this can leave the bridge now, and after this we're all complicit. And everyone's like, no, we're standing by our captain because it's Star Trek. And Eddington's like, no, the Admiral gave me an order, we're not to do this. I have therefore sabotaged the ship. Because that's the correct thing to do. And he's not wrong. He is the only one there who's actually obeying orders in the way the chain of command would. So I think putting him into those situations is quite interesting.
Yeah, good character.
A big thing we really just need to perhaps give a little bit of emphasis to is the Dominion War. By the time we get to Season 7, this is basically the entirety of the show. I just think it's done so well because the Dominion is such a brutal adversary and such a capable adversary. The reason why when they introduced the Jem'Hadar, they had a Galaxy-class ship, the USS Odyssey, go out and sort of encounter the Jem'Hadar first and get destroyed is because it's the same class of ship as the Enterprise. And so the audience will go, they can beat the Enterprise. So they're actually quite severe. I like the ruthlessness that grows up and up and up, and you go from that, well, they're occupying, but they're kind of just bringing order to a flattened society on Cardassia, to just the levels of oppression that you see for them to try and continue their regime, and the ruthlessness of it, the leadership of the female changeling, and by the end of it, it's a brutal set of battles to get there that includes the loss of the Defiant at one point.
I think why this succeeds is it's not just one enemy. You know, you've got the changelings, or the one particular changeling at the top pulling the strings. You got the Vorta, you got the Jem'Hadar. They recruit the Cardassians. And so it's on different levels and on different fronts. And it's not just we are fighting this one enemy. I think that's why that works so well. It's really good in that respect.
No, absolutely. And certainly that moment where Dukat brings Cardassia into the Dominion is a real sort of wow moment that I didn't see coming. I didn't expect. The moment when the Breen suddenly side with the Dominion and kind of displace the Cardassians, I think is really well done. I like Dumas' character sort of go from the kind of bitchy kind of, why don't I ever get a good job sort of, background character to
he shoots Dukat's daughter at one point.
Yeah, and then he's the guy who shoots Dukat's daughter. He's sort of the ultimate Cardassian, and then slowly ends up being the leader of the Resistance. Is a really interesting arc as well.
Yeah, alongside Kira. I was surprised at how he got taken out in the end. It wasn't a very big or grand death. I thought he might have, if he was going to die, he might have got a better death. He had become such an interesting character.
It's interesting. We're recording this only a few weeks after we recorded our Stranger Things Alternate Galaxies, and one of the things we made in that was a bit of a surprise that so few characters ended up dead at the end of the finale. I can actually remember, I can't remember what the number was, whether it was 5 or 7, but the production team actually said to the fans, there will be, it was 5 or 6 or 7 deaths of characters before the end of season 7. So like in that last half dozen episodes. And they're right, you go through and Gowron gets killed and Dumas gets killed and etc. etc. So that sense that they don't get through the battle without killing off some regulars is, I think, important.
Yeah, no, it's very well done.
A couple of minor things I just wanted to talk about. I really like the model of the Deep Space Nine space station, or Terek Nor as it was known. I like that it doesn't look like previous Federation things, because it's not. You can actually look at the model and go, oh yeah, there's the command deck, and there's the promenade, and there's the docking ring, and I just think it looks really, really good, and that's put to really good effect during that wonderful theme. I remember being a bit weirded out, like a lot of Star Trek fans, watching The Emissary for the first time and having it not start with space, the final frontier. That was a bit weird. But I do really like that theme. And I particularly like, I don't know if you noticed this, Rob, at the start of season 4, they make the theme just a little bit more jaunty as there's more life coming to Deep Space Nine, and they add in a few extra ships and just make it look a little busier to show that the station is becoming more mainstream and busier.
I didn't, because I was skipping the credits on Netflix.
I was worried that you had. That's a shame.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. I'll go and catch a copy on YouTube or something.
Yeah, no, absolutely do, because there are two subtle but different versions of the theme tune and the graphics. And look, the final point I want to make before getting to our next segment is just how important that Bajoran setting is. We at the end of the show have a Bajoran government that we understand how it works. We understand the entire Bajoran religion and their structure, who the Kai is, who the Vedics are, the different factions, all that sort of thing. I just think that adds to a whole effectiveness of the thing. We know what currency they all operate on with their gold pressed latinum, and we know they have bricks and slips and slits, bricks, bars, slips, strips, all, you actually know the different currency denominations.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Bajor is a very interesting place. I mean, we've got that whole stream of story at the end with Kai Wynn and Gul Dukat going at it at Mount Doom or wherever they are. Yeah. And of course that ties in very heavily to Cisco's final moments as well. Oh, really good stuff.
It is. So if you've got no more points, Rob.
No, I don't.
We're going to move to our next segment, which I'm doing particularly because we have this dynamic of you coming to a well-known show for the first time. I've got 7 or so episodes here, which are famous ones that I think most people who've watched Deep Space Nine will know or remember. And I just want to get your quick reactions and thoughts of these as you watch them.
Okay.
First of all, your reaction, Rob, to the episode Blood Oath, where Dax joins with original series Klingons Kor, Kang and Koloth to fight a sworn enemy.
Yes, very good. It felt like that there was no room for those guys in the show, so why not have a blast of an adventure?
Yeah. No, it was fun to see those actors again.
Yeah.
The Jem'Hadar. Sisko meets a new alien race from the Gamma Quadrant who wipe out a Bajoran colony and promise they'll be back.
I don't remember the episode per se. Were they fighting out in a desert with a little base?
No, that was the one where Sisko and Jake and Nog go camping and come across them.
That's right. No, but the Jem'Hadar as a concept, when I first saw them, I thought, well, this is quite interesting. You know, the concept of the white and all of that. Yeah, good.
Past tense parts 1 and 2, Sisko, Dax and Bashir find themselves in a sanctuary zone in 2024.
Yeah, that was really cool. Very prescient. I mean, you can look at the way those homeless camps are set up and it's like, oh, that kind of looks like San Francisco now. The Dax storyline was probably the weakest, where she just gets to meet the media baron character and everything goes really well for her.
Yeah.
That she gets a really easy sort of ride. But the other two have, quite a story there. And that's where, if I'm remembering, Sisko has to become the figure from history.
Yes, Gabriel Bell.
Yes. That was like, oh, how are we going to get out of this? Yeah, great episodes, yeah.
Yeah, and what they're really good at there is when they're talking about the situation, it's not done in a, well, this fascist came to power and now they're doing fascist things. It's done in a, well, society kind of just got desperate and things got out of hand and they're doing the best they can and that's just not good enough. And even the guards are kind of just, I'm here for my paycheck, dude, which I think is really good.
Yeah.
The Way of the Warrior. The Klingons declare war on Cardassia.
Yeah, good. I don't remember specifics from the episode, but it did put Worf on the bridge of a Klingon ship, I think.
That's the one that introduces Worf.
There you go. So that's bringing Worf into the show. Well, that was needed. I think that was a good thing to do.
Yes. I think that Worf works far better in Deep Space Nine than he ever worked in TNG. I think if you actually watch TNG, Worf is actually terrible at his job.
Well, if he wasn't, there'd be no story sometimes.
That's true. Trials and Tribulations. The defiant crew are thrown back in time and meet the crew of Kirk's Enterprise and some tribbles.
Yeah, that's just a love letter to Star Trek, isn't it? The DS9 cast with the 60s uniforms and hair, and even the footage is a bit grainy, if I recall. It's a gimmick, without question, but it works, and it surprised me. I think I even said to you at the time I watched it, oh, I'm surprised 90s TV pulled this off, like being able to merge bits of old film and new film, and even just to do the look so seamlessly. It never falls onto the wrong side of the ledger. It never feels cheesy. I thought that was really great. Yeah,
so it was done as the 30th anniversary episode. It went monstrously over budget. So
I can imagine.
You say they put it off on 90s technology. They did it with a lot of money.
Right.
But no, it is absolutely lovely. Fun fact, the Deep Space Nine crew hadn't been shown the sets of the Enterprise corridor and the like before they went on the set. So that shot of them just walking out of the turbo lift and seeing original Enterprise sets and sort of doing the, oh wow, was completely genuine.
Mm-hmm.
And terrifying to think that was the 30th anniversary episode of Star Trek. This year is the 60th anniversary. So that is as far... We are now, again, as far from Trials and Tribulations as Trials and Tribulations is from Where No Man Has Gone Before.
Scary, yeah.
Far Beyond the Stars. Sisko has visions where he's a writer in segregated 1950s America.
Yeah, that was great. I mean, that barely felt like a normal Trek episode for obvious reasons, but all the ideas of Star Trek are still there. I got to say, I've said this on the show before in other areas. I normally don't like TV shows where writers write something about the importance of writers or how writing can save the world, because it's always a bit, oh, you see that? Writing is super important. And, I'm a writer too, so get it? I'm really important because I'm a writer.
Yes.
But this lands really nicely. The concept of him as the sci-fi author in the 50s, which is obviously a difficult time, and having like Odo's actor playing this completely different character who's just not entirely mean to him, but certainly showing the attitudes of the time. Yeah, that had some good stuff in it. Yeah.
Yeah, look, it starts off as just a fun conceit to see characters like Quark and Odo and General Martok all out of their makeup and playing different characters, or Dax is suddenly the ditzy secretary. Oh my God, she's got a worm in her belly!
Yeah.
It starts off as that fun sort of conceit, but just as it gets more and more real, it really lands. Avery Brooks' performance is really good, and even there's like some reference of Trek itself in there, in the fact that the character that Kira is playing, the woman sci-fi writer, writes with initials because they don't want anyone to know that it's a woman sci-fi writer. That was exactly what happened with DC Fontana back on original Trek.
Yeah, who also wrote for B5.
Who did write for B5, yes.
Yeah.
Bada bing, bada boom. The crew have to defeat a holosuite gangster program.
That was a lot of fun because those Vic Fontaine episodes that come in the final season, basically, I've found a lot of fun. And just to do that great scene where they all kit up to do their final mission to get rid of the guy.
Their Ocean's 11 bit.
Yes, and they're walking through the promenade and they're all in the different outfits. Oh, man, that was really great, yeah.
It's funny looking back. As I said, I was a teenager watching all this. And I will admit, as a teenager, all the Vic Fontaine stuff, I was just like, why are we doing this? This is boring. Why aren't we shooting aliens? Where are the starships? Watching it as an adult, you just go, this is so much fun and so delightful. So it's the final episode before they basically start the big, massive, basically a 7-parter to finish the season. And getting Cisco on stage singing The Best Is Yet to Come is just a lovely moment.
It's really good.
What You Leave Behind. The finale. The Federation wins the war, but Cisco must prevent the release of the Costamosion.
Yeah, I loved it. I'm sure that's a common... Again, I'm not in the fandom, so I don't know, but I assume people love it. I think it wrapped things up really well. As I mentioned earlier, you did have different storylines going on, like things were happening down on Mount Doom, while things were happening on Cardassia with the Resistance, while space battles were happening and they're trying to punch through the line. All of that stuff going on simultaneously, but you never sort of didn't forget what people were doing or didn't remember what was going on. It was all done so well. Everything came to a really nice conclusion, I think. And I think it was one of those finales that works.
No, I think it is possibly the best finale in Star Trek. Although there've been some pretty good ones. Endgame, I'm not a Voyager fan, but Endgame's pretty good. Obviously, All Good Things is a very good end to TNG. But this is right up there. You're right, it wraps everything up really well. It moves everybody on, but in keeping with the tone of Deep Space Nine, it's not a universally happy, triumphant ending because Cisco has gone, and that last shot of Cassidy, the pregnant Cassidy, and Jake looking out the window at Bajor is a poignant one.
And this idea that, he will come back at some time. Maybe I'll come back next week, maybe I'll come back yesterday, or whatever the line was. That leaves things open in a nice way. But there is a sense of finality that for the moment, in this moment in time, he's gone. Yeah,
and some people get very happy endings, some people get very melancholic endings. I think that's very realistic.
Yeah, beautiful.
Rob, as we always do with our alternate galaxies, we'll move into a few favourites and least favourites. So start us off, you've been watching this. What is your favourite episode, or I'll allow episodes?
I made a list, and I won't go through them all. I made a list of 7 faves and 7 ones I didn't like, and I had a top 3 for both. The top 3 favourite episodes we've largely discussed, but I will briefly mention For the Uniform, because I mentioned earlier that there was another episode where I said I can't believe they did that, and it was in For the Uniform when Cisco says to Eddington, I'm going to poison this Maquis colony. And Eddington goes, you won't do that. And he does. And I could not believe he did that. I mean, it forces an evacuation. People get off the planet. That's fine. He's not killing people. But he then ups the stakes and says, well, I'm going to poison more. And that's how he finally gets Eddington in the end. I just couldn't believe he did that, Dave.
Yeah, that is a real rug pull. It's a great episode.
Yeah. In the Pale Moonlight is another, having to team up with Garrick, get the senator murdered and all of that to get the Romulans into the war was great. And one that's also been mentioned, but not in a big way, is It's Only a Paper Moon was one of my favourite episodes too.
Lovely.
With Nog coming back and he's missing his leg. Well, he's got a fake leg and he wants to live in the fantasy world with Vic for a while. I thought that was really, really good. My runners-up were Far Beyond the Stars, Trials and Tribulations, and Little Green Men, which we discussed to some degree. One that we didn't discuss, though, Hard Time, which is, I think peak O'Brien must suffer as he gets 20 years of prison put into his head. He hasn't spent 20 years there, but it's in his head. Now, the show never talks about it again or uses it, which I think is wild, given what he's gone through. But in isolation, it's still quite effective, and I think Colm Meaney absolutely sells that he's been punished for 2 decades. I thought that was a great episode.
No, that's a very, very strong list. I've got 3, and then again a couple of runners up, so I'll do the same. In my top 3, like you, I've got In the Pale Moonlight. I think a lot of people have that as their favourite episode. It is just so well done. Avery Brooks is so good in there. Andrew Robertson, fantastic as Garak, and just it's not something any other Star Trek would do. I just think it's a powerful piece of television. At number 2, I've got the double episode Homefront Paradise Lost, which is the one where Sisko goes back to be in charge of Earth security and finds out that his old mentor, Admiral Layton, who was also the general from Babylon 5, they are basically making the decision that to save Paradise, they've got to destroy Paradise. They've got to go against Federation principles. And I watch that now and just see how a good person can make a bad decision is really, really interesting. And even, I remember watching that again during the height of COVID, and all the stuff about, refusing to be tested and refusing to be, and you sort of get that with those moments of, we do compromise our things occasionally, and sometimes it's right and sometimes it's wrong. And not for a moment saying COVID, testing was wrong. Of course it was correct. I'm not an anti-vaxxer anyway. Let me be clear.
I know that.
but when you get Grandpa Sisko, as I would like to call him, and what a piece of stunt casting that was, getting Sisko's father played by just a iconic character of 50s US cinema.
Yeah.
A great episode that really tests their morals. Another little one that we haven't mentioned properly, although I mentioned a part of it in passing, is Rocks and Shawls. This is the one that has 2 plots. One of them is the Sisko sort of attack team have been out on a mission to attack the Jem'Hadar Tetracell White facility, and they've been on board a stolen Jem'Hadar ship, and they've crashed on a planet, and it's just them and a bunch of desperate Jem'Hadar, and they've got to survive and work with each other, and eventually the Vorta betrays the Jem'Hadar to save himself, and you get that moment where the Starfleet crew are like, well, we can't just massacre them. And Sisko says, no, this isn't a debate. I'm giving the order. We survive or they survive. We have to massacre them.
Yeah.
On the same time, the other plot on the ship is Kira doing her whole, well, as long as I work with the Dominion and the Cardassians, that means that nobody's going to be executed and we're not going to be oppressed, so it's all really good. And then the Vedic calls her out as a collaborator. She says, no, I'm doing the moral thing. And then the Vedic commits suicide in public. Yes. And that's the thing that wakes Kira up to go, what the hell? I've become a collaborator. I've sold out everything I ever believed in. And again, to see somebody like Kira get to that place in an entirely reasonable and logical manner, but have got to the wrong place, I just think is really fascinating.
Yeah, well, people never think they're the bad guy. Well, if they're not sociopaths anyway. And there, I'm not even saying Kira is a bad guy. But it just shows that she's thinking, I'm doing all the right things here. Doesn't cross her mind that she's collaborated.
No, absolutely. Some others that I had on my list, past tense for all the reasons we've discussed. Inter Arma Eamon Sealant Legis, which is that big one that brings together the Romulans and the Federation and Section 31. That's a great piece of drama. The Siege of AR 558, which is just brutal and nasty and shows a bit of realism to the war that I thought was really important. And yes. I'm going to put in there The Valiant, which is the one where they come across the Academy kids who are sort of go on this reckless sort of war, and again you see this twisted morality from a different point of view. I just think that's really effective as well.
And that's one of the episodes I believed I had seen before, but it was one of the few.
Very cool. I'll keep going with our least favourite episodes. I've got 3. At number 3, I've got Meridian, which is the one where Dax falls in love with a guy who can only phase in and out for like a little bit of a window, and it's terrible. I've got Ferengi Love Songs, which to me is just the worst of the Ferengi ones, where it's just like, this is actually just silly and it doesn't work. And my least favourite episode of all is Let He Who Is Without Sin, which is where they all go to Risa to have a dirty weekend and suddenly fall in with a bunch of eco-terrorists and nothing much happens.
We have 2 snaps in there in my main list and my runner-up list, Dave.
Fantastic, let's hear it.
My main list is Melora, a story where I think the intentions are good but the execution's a bit rough, because Melora isn't disabled where she comes from, yet the story keeps framing that something's wrong with her, and Bashir doesn't help by treating her as if she's a problem to be fixed. And then just to make it even worse, the script makes her very abrasive, so you're stuck thinking, well, they're doing her dirty, but oh wow, she's hard work too. It's all well-meaning, but it's very awkward.
Yeah.
I had Meridian as well. It just didn't make sense to my wife and I that Dax would throw away everything, like her Starfleet career, her centuries of experience, just to be with this guy she's known for 5 minutes. Yep. So agree there. And another one in my top list was Prophet and Lace, where Quark literally becomes a woman, and I do mean literally, and it ends up feeling like a very tired sort of cross-dressing gag rather than any sort of meaningful commentary. And that episode also starts with him engaging in some really ugly, very non-funny sexual harassment of one of his staff, and none of that's addressed at all. It's just an awkward episode all around. For my runners-up, I also had Let He Who Is Without Sin. I thought that was bloody terrible. I had Fascination, where Loxana Troy's whatever it is illness made everyone fall in love with one another. But it wasn't like a truth serum. Like, we weren't given actual insights into people. Like, Dax really didn't lust for Sisko, or Bashir didn't really lust for Kira. So all the matchups were very weird, and just revealed nothing. Bar Association, which was another Ferengi comedy episode where Rom starts a trades union and Quark just sulks for the whole episode. The Babylon 5 trades union episode bored me too, but at least that story felt like it had stakes. This one just felt silly.
Yep.
And finally, The Muse, where you have this sort of creepy succubus story. You know, the alien woman drains on creativity and Jake gets pulled in, which just makes him look dumb.
Yep.
I didn't think much of that episode.
No, none there that I'm going to defend at all. It's interesting that you mentioned Loxana there. I think that one of the things that became really clear quite quickly in Deep Space Nine is how different the tone was to TNG, such that when they bring TNG characters across to the new franchise, it just doesn't work. Loxana on TNG, there are a couple of really good Loxana episodes, but I think most of them don't work on TNG, but they certainly don't work on DS9. But even when they bring Q across in season 1, now Q works really well in TNG. He goes on to work really well in Voyager, but you bring him onto Deep Space Nine and he just doesn't work at all. But at least you get that moment where Sisko's just like, this guy's just an annoying idiot, I'm going to thump him. It's like, Picard never thumped me.
That's right. That was great.
It does highlight the difference. Rob, let's get positive again. Tell us your favourite character or characters.
It is characters plural. My favourite character, you're just going to laugh now, is probably Julian Bashir. Because I enjoy, there you go, I enjoy very British, slightly pervy guys in US sci-fi. I like Gaius Baltar in BSG for much the same reason. It's not just that he stands out from everyone else acting quite American, regardless of where their character is supposed to come from. I also like the story he gets, which I appreciate takes some time to get going of, you know, he's this genetically enhanced guy and that was illegal and it could have gone wrong and all of that. I think that's really quite interesting. I also, probably equal with Julian, I really like Dax, not just because the two Daxes are played by stunningly beautiful women, but there's something very Doctor Who-ish about being in a body and being your own person, but also having all these memories of other lives you've lived that weren't in that body. I find that a really great concept. They're my main two. Do you want the other two?
Yeah, keep going.
I also really like Garrick, because I like spy characters, assassins, ambiguous people who'll get their hands dirty. He's not in a lot of episodes, relatively speaking, so I can't put him as a top-tier favourite, but I liked him very much. And I'm also giving a shout out here to Vic Fontaine, because I love the anachronistic feel of 50s music in the far future. I like 50s music in the way it's used in Fallout too, in that series. I do get the sense they stumbled onto this concept and thought, oh, holy f***, this is great. And then started to jam him into every story they could.
Totally.
Singing at least one song or more in each episode. And it's like, guys, let's have a reason for using him, not just be a sugar hit. You know, having Nog go and rehabilitate with him was a really great storyline, as I mentioned earlier. But I really liked Vic Fontaine, you know, hey, pally, you know, all of that stuff.
We've got one snap across our longer lists.
Okay.
My favourite characters, look, at the top of the list I've got Kira. I think that she's not just a strong, capable woman in sci-fi, which is frankly unusual for sci-fi at the time outside of Babylon 5, and pretty much the first really good example of that in Star Trek, I'm going to say. She's a character that's got a real backstory, a character that is outside of that Starfleet cliche, so you get different inspirations, different vibes, but who just develops really well over time, is challenged really well over time. Some of her storylines are the most interesting storylines, and just a really, really good performance.
Mm-hmm.
Also, very, very close, I've got Sisko. If I can't have Captain Jellicoe for his one episode in charge of the Enterprise in TNG, I would say Sisko is my favourite of the Star Trek captains. I like his attitude, I like his decisiveness, I like his ruthless streak, but I also like his interest in African culture. I like his interest in cooking. I like the fact that he's a genuine family man. And again, rare in sci-fi generally, but Trek specifically, to actually have a good and effective family man. And look, Avery Brooks made the point that it was very important to him to actually show a black father being a good dad on mainstream primetime television in America, which just wasn't as common as it should have been in the 1990s. But just, yeah, a great character there. In my runners-up, I've got Garak, just like you, for all the reasons you've said. That's a great performance. I have regularly at work quoted Garak's line about the moral of the boy who cried wolf is not don't tell lies, it's don't tell the same lie twice. I think Jake is good just because of what he is and how he works. And then I wanted to give a shout-out to a couple of the recurring characters, Wayun, Kai Wynn, Dukat, Dumar. I think that one of the things that elevates this series above others is that those characters that might only be in a few episodes every now and then are so well written, have got such amazing actors and actresses playing them, and are just really effective. Kai Wynn especially. I mean, we literally had an Oscar winner playing a semi-regular baddie on the show. That's incredible. And I look at both our lists, Rob, and I just go, no one's mentioned Odo. No one's mentioned Miles O'Brien. You know, there are lots of really good characters, and I just, it feels really bad.
Yeah, Odo is fantastic. Miles O'Brien is fantastic. Yeah, wow.
We said we'll do least favourite characters. Let me say, there's none that I really dislike, unless you sort of go down to a recurring character, like an obscure recurring character like the Grand Nagus I could have picked. I'm going to go for Worf because I think Worf works in small bursts, but over the long term, I struggle with him sometimes. Yes, he gets very funny lines, and Michael Dorn's a very good actor when it comes to comedic timing, but particularly in that first season, season 4, where Worf's introduced, and he's just doing dumb stuff. Like, he's just getting in the way of Odo's investigations. He's just getting in the way of Sisko doing stuff. And I just sort of thought, I don't dislike you, but, you know, every week for 4 years you became a little bit annoying. In the same vein, I don't dislike him, but Rom, when you get too much of him, I think just didn't quite work. I was glad that they did make him a more serious character. They did get to see him start to work for Miles, and then he does have a proper role in the Resistance, but I just don't think he really sort of works. In contrast to Nog, who is another really effective character that goes from being a very minor recurring character to basically a regular. And that performance that Aaron Eisenberg gives when he gives that speech about how he doesn't want to be a failure like his dad, he wants to join Starfleet, that's a really amazing monologue from a relatively minor character.
Yeah, agree. Yeah.
Your least favourite, Rob?
I have a list here, and it'll go around the block before I get to the actual answer, so bear with me.
Sure.
Because it's a hard one to answer, because there are characters I initially didn't like. I really thought, you know, they sucked, but I came to really like them in time. Nog, who we've just been mentioning, yes, I found insufferable at the start. It didn't help that his scenes were with Jake, who I also found reasonably annoying through most of the show, actually, and they'd just be there on the promenade coming up with ridiculous ideas, and it was like, this is just wasting my time as a viewer. I'm not enjoying this at all. But as time goes on and he goes to the academy and gets the ridiculousness knocked out of him, I came to really like Nog, so he's not on the list.
Yep.
Then there are characters like Kai Wynn or Wayun, who I initially didn't like precisely because I wasn't meant to like them. Yeah. You know, Wynn is the religious fruitcake, the kind of person I just can't stand. Wayun is this obsequious little shit. But over time, I came to really like Wayun. I found him really funny. And I was enjoying him. Wynn shat me right to the end, but again, that was by design. The actress is 100% doing her job if she comes on and I'm like, oh, I can't stand her. You know, I get that. I'm not hating the performance at all. So now we get to the meat and potatoes. I get to characters like Keiko O'Brien or Cassidy Yates, and I'm like, no. Every time they enter a story, I'm like, yeah, my brain's going to check out for 45 minutes. Partly because they just interfere with characters I like O'Brien and Sisko. Partly, I'm just going to say it, I don't think they're particularly well acted. And partly, they never do anything particularly interesting on their own. They're just these +1 characters, which I don't know. Maybe Avery Brooks or Colin Meaney thought, isn't this amazing? Doesn't this flesh out my character? Because he's a man and he's three-dimensional. He's got a life away from the job. He has needs. He has desires, you know. It's very natural to have a partner, but I'm like, no, every time these people come on, I lose interest really, really rapidly. I got more out of Cisco when he'd coach baseball or go and cook with his dad in the restaurant, you know, not sitting with Cassidy on the lounge and saying things in an extra slow, extra deep voice, you know. Thankfully, neither of them showed up all that often on the show. They'd find reasons that Keiko had to go away for 6 months at a time. That was great. But yeah, it was probably Keiko and Cassidy I didn't get along with the most.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue Keiko with you, although at least that one episode where she's possessed by the Wraith, that's a really good episode. I think that's actually quite a good use for a character. And the first time that we actually learn about the Wraiths, which we don't even know what they're called at the time, that's pretty cool. But yeah, she does struggle, and the only good thing or redeeming thing I'll say about Keiko O'Brien is that at least it helps to give us the Julian Miles romance.
Yeah, true enough. Also, I was going to say, when she's possessed, does that give you shades of in Angel? When Angel becomes evil, he has much more personality and is much more interesting.
Yes, it does actually. Yes. Yeah, no, that's all very good. So, Rob, we're up to our final thoughts. I'll kick off and just wrap up by saying essentially what I've been saying now for an hour and a half. I love this show. It is a top 10 show for me. I love it because of the twists it does that a lot of TV and certainly Star Trek wouldn't normally do. I love it for the breadth of characters that it has. I love it for the fun that it has. I just think it's a really good piece of 90s television. Of course, part of it is that I love it because 93 to 99 literally exactly encompasses my teenage years from 13 to 19. So obviously it's an important part of my life. But I will just say, I will put my hand on my heart and say, not only do I think that this is the best Star Trek series, but I will say that the 12 episodes, the back 6 of season 5, starting with Soldiers of the Empire, through to the front 6 of season 6, which ends with Sacrifice of Angels, I think that is the best run of 12 episodes ever in Star Trek, and I just think that sums up everything good with the show. I love it. I'm a fan.
Yeah, I love 90s television, Dave. It's an era we'd never seen before, and it's an era we'll never have again. You know, it's this bubble, and you can step into it and experience things. Even here in the 2020s, I've been able to watch this for the first time, and that's amazing. It might be something you do one day with the X-Files.
Yeah.
Which, for me, is my 1990s, just like DS9 is your 1990s. X-Files is my 1990s, so maybe we can do a bit of a swapsy there on a future Alternate Galaxies.
I've actually never watched the X-Files. It completely passed me by, and I have thought to myself, I don't know if I'll ever do the full, there's something like 11 seasons or something. I don't know if I'll ever do the full 11, but I should do at least a few sometime.
Yeah. And when I was making my favourite episodes list, you know, I had like 3 main ones and 4 runners-up. I had about more than 20 the original list. That's not even the complete list. I probably had more that could have made that list. So there were a lot of episodes I liked here.
Me too.
I really enjoyed the whole experience. And just yesterday, actually, yes, I watched the DS9 documentary, What We Left Behind, and I really enjoyed that, and I'm very glad they got people commenting in it on the series before they passed away, because, you know, several of these people have passed away now, as well as giving time to Terry Farrell, who obviously left in a pretty bad way, to just speak her mind about leaving the show. It's a really great documentary.
Yep.
And it made me really sentimental about seeing a workplace where people genuinely liked each other, put in the hard yards, and can now look back on it very fondly on the whole. And it reminded me of some workplaces I'd been in, but one in particular that I'm very protective of in my memories and when I talk about it. And when I see these actors interacting now, I think of that particular workplace and I could empathise with their sadness of the series ending. I was probably sadder at the series ending after I watched the documentary than I was actually watching the series end.
Oh, wow, okay.
If that doesn't sound too weird. Yeah.
No, I totally get it. It feels like a collection of people that actually feel like people in a way. Look, as much as I love many of the characters in TNG and even in original Trek, I feel like there are real people on Deep Space Nine. that actually go to the bar and have a drink and play darts and do all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, go and reenact the Alamo.
Yeah, that's right. Rob, I'm really glad you watched this show because it's given me a chance to speak about it, and I've really enjoyed having this chat.
Yeah, me too, Dave. As soon as, when I was halfway through it, I was thinking, yeah, we're going to do an Alternate Galaxies on this, and it was just the obvious thing to do. It's great.
Absolutely. If you have just arrived for our Deep Space Nine chat, we have got some other Alternate Galaxies looking at 3 Trek episodes that came out last year. Please go check them out, but also, please come and join us for our Doctor Who content. If you like Doctor Who at all, our next episode in a week's time will be our main monthly show for January, which is an Ask Us Anything show. But we also have the List Makers coming out soon. We've got our first Gin and TARDIS for 2026 coming out soon enough. There's a lot here on the Doctor Who show, as always. And there'll be another Alternate Galaxies when the mood takes us sometime soon.
Yeah, I'm sure there will be.
But until then, I've been Dave.
Should I sing us out? Vic Fontaine style, Dave?
This is the Doctor Who show computer, and to stop the catastrophe of Rob singing, I'm editing this episode here.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. You've been listening to Alternate Galaxies, the podcast where Rob and Dave from the Doctor Who show take a look at other great sci-fi and fantasy that we think Doctor Who fans might like. You can reach us at hello@thedwshow.net, on Twitter @The DW Show, or on Facebook /The DW Show. Alternate Galaxies is an irregular podcast, so stay tuned to the Doctor Who show and other programs on our feed to know when the next episode's coming. Our theme music is called Wretched Destroyer and is by Kevin MacLeod. Find him at incompetech.com. Well, that's it for this episode. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye!